Welcome to De-Stress 302. I'm Alena, the host with the Cause Production crew. And here we are with...
Wendy Eastburn-Teal.
Alright, I'm going to start off with sort of an introductory question. Can you tell us about your mental health journey?
My mental health journey actually started as a child. We have addiction in my family. There was a lot of dysfunction as a result, and we moved around a lot. By the time I got to my freshman year of high school, I was in my 10th school. So around my childhood, I was familiar with addiction and, anxiety, depression, moving around. And as I got older, as we all, the brothers and sisters, got older, we all had an impact of that in our lives. In this January of 22, I found my son deceased. He had taken his life. I did not know much about the mental health community at the time. I know a lot about the mental health world, but I didn't know a lot about the mental health community. And Nolan was my son, and he did not have mental health troubles, issues. He was very good at talking things out. What I found out after he died was the mental health community is desperate for people to speak out, because if this could happen to Nolan, this could happen to any child. And as a result of working with all of his friends, our children are suffering right now. They're crying out in darkness and in isolation, and they're living through really difficult times. So right now my emphasis is working with children in the mental health community, but I'm certainly involved with a lot of other organizations for adults as well.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us about Nolan's Law?
Nolan's Law is a result of what I experienced and his friends experienced after his passing. Because his passing was suicide, that is a forbidden topic for the most part, for most of our society. The reality is we all talk about suicide awareness until it happens, and then nobody wants to talk about it. The students were coming to my home. We were all grieving. Toward the end of January, the students said they felt like they were not getting any support from the school and that it was all being brushed under the rug. And so I went in on February 4th, not to discuss Nolan, but to discuss the children that are left behind. And I said they feel like this whole thing is being swept under the rug. And I was told by the administration that we are 100% sweeping this under the rug. I wasn't quite sure how you sweep a child that was named Mr. Mayor as a freshman, and he passed as a senior, under the rug. But more importantly, there's not a lot we can do for Nolan anymore. He's gone. But the remaining 1,000 students at this school are struggling, and they're suffering. So that kicked off a journey through about a year and a half of trying to create policies, procedures, and the way to recognize a passing of a student for any reason, any cause of death. What our children went through was very difficult, and what I went through as a parent of a deceased child was very difficult. So with the help of legislation in Delaware, Val Longhurst really spearheaded this. She helped write a bill, and it's called Nolan's Law. It's House Bill 4. And there are 3 basic components to it. The first is for K through 12, the death of anybody related to a school, and that can be a student, faculty, admin, cafeteria worker, maintenance, PTO, PTSA, whatever, or PTA. If they're involved with a school and the students can be impacted with this is considered a traumatic event in the death of somebody related to the school. As a result of it being clearly defined now as a traumatic event, it does not matter the manner in which anybody passes. They're all equal. The second thing that it does is it develops for the state of Delaware, for all public and charter schools, policies and procedures for when an event like this happens, the passing of somebody. So how do you communicate? When do you communicate? What do you communicate? What's an appropriate way to remember somebody? Is planting a tree appropriate? Yes. Is renaming a school? Probably excessive. So they give you some baseline rules, regulations, policies, procedures in this, and that was created by the Delaware Department of Education. And third, and probably most importantly, there will now be 45 days of grief counseling for any student who needs or requests it. It will be in school. It'll be free of charge for the students. It will be paid by the Department of Education in Delaware. And if they require an additional 45 days, they will get that coverage as well. After that, they will be referred to private coverage, but they won't be insured. Somebody will help them get there and get to the person to help them. But what this does is create something in-house where they get to know the counselor one-on-one. The state will send in crisis counselors for the first 3 days. The response I got back for students was they didn't know Nolan and they don't know me. And they're only here for 3 days. So I sent in Pause for Pets because pets don't care. And everybody can get comfort from a pet. But this way they will have a one-on-one connection with the counselor, and it will open up the door to talk about more than just grief, if that is seriously what's going on. And having talked with a lot of students, yes, they had a lot of grief. They had a lot of guilt. But they also had their own things that they were going through. And this is a great way for them to not feel any stigma, no shame. Just go get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can definitely see what a huge help that would be. And like, even in my own school, my own life, I can definitely imagine how helpful that could be for so many students, or even people I would know. And continuing with like just, I mean, the remarkable life of your son and how he impacted others, would you like to talk about the Underdog Scholarship?
Absolutely. One of the things the students wanted to do when he passed, which was originally turned down, but with the right amount of working together, we were able to pass and build a scholarship. His closest friends, there were 6 of them, 2 in particular wrote it, his 2 closer friends, and they created the traits, characteristics that a recipient might get. It's called the Underdog Scholarship because Nolan was. Nolan was 5'2", but 10 feet in personality. He wasn't captain of the football, but he was the heart and soul, and he was the heart and soul of charter. And what they wanted to recognize, first of all, Nolan loved sports, any sport. And he was fiercely competitive. He was one of 2 students to make the varsity football team, as a freshman. So he had the heart of a lion. And they wanted to recognize that. They wanted to recognize somebody who comes with a team spirit, who is a leader on and off the field, who has a heart, who can be trusted, and who will always put the team above their own personal goals. So the characteristics that they came up with were astounding. They were so comforting to my soul to know that that's what people thought about my child. And so every year, the coaches are all requested to present a child or a student, who exhibits these qualities and these characteristics. They must play at least one sport throughout the seasons, and they must be a senior graduating. And the award itself is just the fact that we are recognizing all of these talents and characteristics that you have as a human. They also get a $2,000 scholarship. And the scholarship is expected, or we would like it to be referred for, obviously, college costs, military, if they're joining the military, trade schools, basically anything that's going to help them advance their future So they will get a $2,000 check that day.
And I can also see how that would really make an impact on so many students there, and being able to remember Nolan in that way as well. For my next question, how has your experience changed the way you view mental health as a whole?
This whole experience, it's not just changed my perspective of mental health, it's changed my perspective of life. I think the most common denominator in the mental health world and in the grief world, that I am working in both at this point, is isolation. We are a very isolated society, and we self-isolate on our fears because we're afraid of some stigma. We're afraid of somebody knowing we're weak. We are all weak at times throughout life. None of us is expected to be strong every day. And none of us were expected to walk our journeys alone. There will certainly be times where you're going to have to stand on your own through life. But that's not intended for every moment. When you are at your darkest moments in life, you need to not be isolated. When you are grieving, you need to not be isolated. There are people who will share in your journey, share in your emotion, share in where you are at that particular time. So what I've learned that I think is most astounding is how quickly and how absent-mindedly we isolate ourselves and think we're the only ones going through a situation. Mental health problems can begin because genetics, they have it in their family. They can also begin because of an incident. In the case where Nolan passed, all of his friends were going through depression and guilt and anxiety, along with their own things. And as I started to research more about what was happening with suicide and the mental health, I'm an analytic person, it became very clear to me that they could graduate with holes in them if they were not given the appropriate tools and support. They could graduate with holes because nobody helped them get through the death of somebody they loved, and that would be over my dead body. Because when people have holes, they fill them with something, and it's very difficult to think of something positive that people fill them with. So you'll end up in the mental health community with the hole from depression and anxiety, dark thoughts, maybe suicide ideation yourself, alcohol, gambling, addiction. That's how people fill holes. And that is the way a lot of people start a journey, slippery slope, to a place that's very dark and much more isolating. So when we see something that we could prevent from progressing, we need to recognize it up front. We need to recognize the signs and get our children the help that they need so that they don't become adults with holes that are being filled with bad things. Those that have a genetic predisposition can also be impacted by easily by an event that happens. People are very medicated in the world of mental health, and I think that the studies are finding that can exasperate other conditions in the mental health world. So perhaps we're trying to fix ADHD. That's a very simple behavioral health issue. Well, it's the most common known. I'm not sure it's simple. But if they are given the wrong kind of medication, it can lead to suicide ideation and other behavioral mental health problems. So I think we're maybe starting the search to look about medications, but the mental health world has a far way to go because it encompasses much more than just your headspace. It encompasses once those holes are built, now we have to dig up the holes again, empty them out, fill them with something positive. And something positive could be daylight, vitamin D, exercise, I'm not a proponent of exercise, clearly, but I do know that once you go for a nice brisk walk, you do feel better.
Yeah, and even to the point of, community and self-isolation and filling the holes with something positive. I mean, that really strikes home with me as well. I just got out of high school and I'm still building my community, and even back then and that's how I even got here, at this production crew and with the friends that I've made here, and it has been such a huge impact on me being able to have that sort of community, and even sports teams or art clubs or any sort of something where you can find that connection is so important. And I completely agree to your point. How would you sort of approach the differences between sympathizing from afar and empathizing from a place where from firsthand experience?
So let me repeat back and see if I have it correctly. So are you referring to, as an example, someone who has a pretty blessed life, doesn't have a lot of dysfunction in their world, goes through college, gets a psychology degree, goes to grad school, becomes a psychologist, and treats people that have mental health problems, versus someone like myself who has lived through, as a child, all the way through an adult, sitting down in a group setting, peer-to-peer.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between the two, I think it's huge. And I think that is an issue in the whole community. We do not have enough counselors, we do not have enough psychologists, and we do not have enough psychiatrists in any state in the 50 states. In our particular jurisdiction, which is Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, if there's a crisis, we don't even have beds open. So for students, for children, even for grown-ups, and insurance plays a terrible spot. So those outside forces actually stop people from seeking help or even getting the help that they need. And then once they do, if they're confronted with somebody that doesn't really have the empathy skills, the compassion, or the ability to take themselves out of their own place and put themselves in somebody else's position, hence empathy, it can be a roadblock. I do grief support right now. We have some grief support meetings, and I work with parents that have children who are struggling. And I'm every parent's worst nightmare, right? I've lost a child and to suicide. So the connection that the students had with me up front versus their own parents were great. Wonderful human beings, great parents. But they were like, but you don't get it. Wendy gets it. Wendy gets the loss. When I have the grief community, very upfront, I am not somebody with a degree behind. I have a degree, but it's in philosophy, not psychology. And but I have experience. And that opens the door for other people to feel seen and heard and understood. We can say something in the group like, I know that I shouldn't be doing this, but I still pay for Nolan's cell phone. And if I'm sitting there with people who've never lost a child or never lost somebody that they truly cared about, they're going to judge me probably. But in the room that I sit where they've lost people, they'll say, I still pay for my child, or I still have a membership for this, or I still do this. So we need that. We need that. That is not to downplay anybody getting help through psychiatry. It's not to downplay anyone finding the psychiatrist or psychologist. What I'm saying is that there's a shortage to begin with, and those that can actually, particularly with children, relate, it's difficult. Mm-hmm. It's difficult because I'm Gen X, and I look at the generation sometimes, I look at my children sometimes, I roll my eyes and say, what are you doing? Because, I'm the kind that, pull your feet up by your bootstraps, or whatever the saying is. And that's not the reality you guys live in. And that was made very clear after Nolan passed, and it's not because of his death. He didn't go through that, but he clearly had a moment of darkness, and the fact that not living anymore was in his wheelhouse and is in the wheelhouse of your generation is scary. It's scary and it's sad. So there is a big difference between the two. Having somebody with life experience versus, I'm going to call it book experience, it's almost critical for particularly students to feel comfortable to open up.
Yeah, and if you were to meet a parent who had the sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of mentality, what would be like the first thing that you would sort of advise them in maybe how they might approach their child with mental health?
I would say something probably a little brutal, which is the number of students who have said to me, I don't want to live anymore, and they're under 18. And the first Gen X thought in my head is, but you haven't lived yet. You cannot react with that any more than the bootstraps. So you have to understand that kids believe the darkness, and that's not right. Kids are falling for the darkness. Kids are not being raised the way we were. They are hounded incessantly on social media. They are being compared to people that are not even real in some instances. We can use our experiences to help students, but we can't use our childhood to judge them.
Yeah, I can definitely, even coming from a place myself, I've heard sort of all the different takes on advice of like, oh, it's over exaggeration, or oh, it's not really how it actually is, and it's up to you to sort of, pull yourself up. And I know it can be really helpful to sort of take a step back and like understand the reality of the culture and of the generation.
And I think it's important to remind students that whatever that darkness is today is not going to be there forever. And that includes the death. Grief will always be, a part of your soul, a part of your life, but you're going to carry it differently. It's not going to be dark. You're going to find the goodness in it. You're going to find the strength in it. And one of the things I would say to the students that went through the grief with Nolan is, how lucky are you that you faced this traumatic event while you were still under the household of your parents, while you were still at a school, while you were still being fought for, that you were not out there on your own for the first time hitting something that dark. You come out stronger, and having this lived experience will change how you perceive the world and your compassion toward the world. And I think coming from a parent that has lost a child, it does make other parents take a step back. A lot of parents that do have problems with their students and are calling me, they're very frustrated, and I get the frustration. Trust me, I get the frustration. But we're not 18, and we're not living with what they did, or they do, and we just need to take a step back, pause, see them for who they are. I think the best compliment that I got throughout this whole process was maybe 2 months after Nolan passed, and I got an email from a mother, and she said, my daughter smiled for the first time today. And all I did was notice her out of the group, pull her aside, and say, you look like there's something on your mind. Do you want to talk about it? All I did was notice her and listen to her and validate her. And that was all she needed at that moment. She didn't need me to fix it. She didn't need me to call her parents and tell her anything. There was an understanding that if there was something grave, I would call the parents. But anything they told me, it's still locked in a file cabinet. But that was a compliment, and it was very telling. She didn't need me to fix it. She needed to be seen and heard.
Yeah, I think people can really underestimate the powerful nature of the question, do you want to talk about it? Or like just the noticing is so important, especially to like younger kids or like teenagers, because oftentimes, you know, I mean, we've talked about self-isolation, being a teenager and a young adult can be so trapping in such a small bubble, and being noticed can really just be the first step in a huge improvement in mental health. Circling back a little bit, you had mentioned you have a degree in philosophy. How would you say that that has affected sort of your view of life or mental health?
It's funny because it does. In philosophy, you're actually taught the logic of thought. So philosophy means thought. It's the process of thought. And that's why when people have PhDs, they're actually, a PhD is a doctorate of philosophy, meaning that they've gone through enough schooling that they've learned. It's all about thought. And so I know a lot of different views of how did we build our country? How is a person? Are they born a blank slate? Or are they born, are they raised by nature or nurture? All of these conversations. And the one thing that's consistent between everybody is nobody has the answer. There is no one right way. But they all, every philosopher thought, you know, Hobbesian theory was the one with the biggest gun, the one with the biggest rock, the one with the biggest hammer, they're going to win. Locke thought you're born with a blank slate and it all works out based on how you start living your experiences. Which turns out sometimes they're both right? So it's very humbling when you really read about philosophy, and from going all the way back, you know, to Aristotle, the Greek philosophers, all the way to our current ones. There is no one right answer to just about anything. There was a big study done, and this is, I think, the one thing that I remember the most coming out of college. There's a study on how can we scientifically prove the sun is going to rise. There is no scientific proof yet that the sun will rise. But it has such a scientific methodology to it. The answer is, how do we know the sun is going to rise? Because it always has.
I like that. Yeah, and for anyone who is going through what you have, whether parent or student, what would you recommend that they do? Like, I mean, just even as small as like a first step, where do they begin with this mental health struggle?
They begin by forgiving themselves for having it. Do not feel guilty. Do not feel ashamed. Do not feel that you're the only person, and do not isolate. So the first thing to do is, you know, I guess recognizing it is the first thing, but that seems to be a silly answer. I think that forgiving yourself, because once you've done that, you don't care what anyone else thinks. You don't care that there's a stigma. You go get the help that you deserve, that you need, that you want, and really that you deserve, you know. So the first thing should be forgive yourself, and then raise your hand. Raise your hand. And if you're just calling, call a stranger. Call me. I put my phone number out there all the time. Call me. And people do, and kids do. And to your point, just being heard sometimes is enough to get the process started. It's not necessarily enough to fix anything, but forgive yourself first, because you don't need to live with guilt, shame. That's going to prohibit you from moving forward, any of those things. Because if you're feeling those, you got to get over those before you can get to the content of what's actually hurting you.
All right. That's all the questions that I have. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure all of the listeners will be so glad to hear from you, and just, really, this has been, just also personally for me, really, really helpful to hear, and just the sort of support that is out there. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. De-Stress 302 is a Cause of the World production. This program was produced by members of the Cause production crew. Crew includes Milan Wood, Alana Hernandez. Associate producers are Adam Hubert and Alena Duggan. Produced by Matt Kelly. Our executive producers are Hayat Omar and Dennis Finicaro. This show was brought to you by the 988 Lifeline in Delaware and the Cause. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, alcohol or drug use, is in emotional distress, or just needs someone to talk to, contact 988. 988's trained, caring counselors are ready to listen. Call, text, or chat 988 for free and confidential support, 24/7, 365. You are not alone. Subscribe to De-Stress 302 today.